I remember back in 2011 when Sonic Generations was first being announced. I didn't have a home console at the time, but it was around then when I started regularly looking into games. And I was fascinated with all types of different games, including ones that I saw my friends have and play. While sitting down watching an episode of X Play, I saw them talk about a new Sonic game. This one had two Sonics. One was Modern Sonic and would play like the last two games that had been released at that time, Sonic Unleashed and Sonic Colors. The other Sonic in the game was a classic Sonic, which had 2D sections based on the classic Sega Genesis games. I was excited for it, though I didn't have any of the systems it was releasing on. It looked like fun, and I knew if I could get my hands on an Xbox or a PlayStation 3, I would try and find a copy. And it only took about a year before I finally had one, as a family member gave me their Xbox, and eventually I was able to get a copy for myself. I no longer have that Xbox nor the copy of the game, but I have recently purchased the original version on PC. That being said, the version I will be looking for this review is of course the remaster that recently came out in October of 2024. This game slowly became one of my favorite Sonic games, and my personal gold standard moving forward for 3D Sonic games. Granted, part of that was mostly down to the fact that most games that came after were mediocre at best. And I'll get to those games eventually, but for now, we have a remaster to look at. Though, before we talk about the game itself, I would like to talk about the Dark Beginning short that Sega released before this game came out. The last few Sonic games that Sega has released have had an animated short to go with them. I think it started with Sonic Mania Plus, but every game since then has had either a prologue or a tie-in to that game that releases within the year. For this game, the short included is focused on Shadow, because the new mode, Shadow Generations. I am extremely happy that this is included in the PS5 version of the game through DLC. I just wish this was available for all versions of the game, because it really does feel weird that Sega keeps making these shorts and having mild plot details, and yet not deciding that it'd be a good idea to add them in with the game. Speaking of, if you do get the DLC on the PS5 version, it includes an animatic that shows earlier versions of what this short would have been. A nice little bonus. The story of the short just has Shadow remembering his time on the Ark 50 years ago, but some of his memories seem to be a bit different to what actually happened.
It's lights.
It's the Aurora Borealis.
Aurora Borealis. At this time of year, at this time of day, in this part of the country, localized entirely within your kitchen.
Yes.
That's it?
Now, what he remembers is one of the droids from Sonic Battle attacking the Ark, which leads to him raiding a gun base to get to the Ark. Guess he just wanted to break stuff because Abraham Tower, the leader of Gun, tells Rouge he could have just asked. At least we get to see Team Dark again and get a damn good song that I really want Sega to release the full version of. They even got the woman who sang the music for Ruby to do it. It is a little interesting that we finally get confirmation that the gun commander's name is Abraham Tower, which was a fan theory for a couple of years. Anyway, that short leads directly into the beginning of Shadow's story, where aboard the Ark, Shadow senses a strange entity and fears that somehow the black arms from his solo game have returned. It definitely feels strange to see Sega referencing the game at all considering its reputation, but they have been addressing older games and even mentioning moments from games that were criticized. part of that is down to the writer of the new Shadow Generations portion of this game, and somebody who's been writing for the franchise since the Archie comic days, Ian Flynn, who the fan base seems to be upset for referencing past games. Leave it to Sonic fans to be the most petty people in the video game industry. Frankly, I enjoy his writing, as he started working with Sonic with the Archie comics, and this isn't the first game story he worked on. He did also have a hand in Frontiers, which I will review in due time. As for the writing and characterization here, I think it works with Shadow, although a lot of his scenes that he rewrote for the base Sonic Generations are a little awkward, though I do prefer them in the remaster because they actually have a story as opposed to the original Sonic Generations that barely had a story. Anyway, it looks like Shadow's suspicion was correct, as when he runs through the Space Colony arc, he ends up running into Black Doom's weird eye thing. I don't entirely know if it's explained how this happened, but if I had to guess, the larva that is seen in the prequel short somehow morphed into Black Doom. That or its temporal fuckery with the Time Eater. Either way, he's somehow back, and Shadow now has to hunt him down and defeat him again. Now, I'm mostly starting with Shadow's story, as it is the newest part of this remaster, and because, for all intents and purposes, it does happen first, technically. During all this happening to Shadow, Sonic's friends throw the blue blur a surprise birthday party. And for the people wondering how old Sonic is, you ask too many questions. It did make some bit of sense for Sonic's birthday being the first major scene in the game, considering the original version of Generations was an anniversary game for the 20th anniversary. So, I'm not really complaining. Though it is funny for them to re-release an anniversary game that clearly has references to it being a celebration of past games in a year that isn't an anniversary. Hell, the game we actually got for Sonic's 30th anniversary was a shoddy remaster of Colors. But much like with Frontiers, I'll get to that when I get to it. And I say Sonic's story starts with his birthday, but it really starts with a classic Sonic stage. Sonic games are nothing without a neat gimmick, what with Sonic 1 being its speed-based gameplay, Sonic 3 and Knuckles with its lock-on technology, Sonic Adventure being the first 3D entry, and games like Shadow the Hedgehog, Sonic 06, and Boom being terrible games. I'm kidding, of course, I don't own Shadow or Sonic Boom. At least not yet, anyway. Don't ask me how I reviewed the game without owning a copy. I have my ways. As for Generations, the big gimmick this time is the two Sonics. Classic Sonic was supposed to be more 2D focused and play like the Genesis games. Not that this really worked, the 2D sections are kind of wonky, and they don't really feel like the Genesis games. That's not to say they're bad, they just don't have the same physics as those classic games. If I had to relate it to something, I guess they're kind of like the advanced games. Basically the boost gameplay without having the boost, but it would require me to have actually played a significant amount of those games to make a proper connection. I have played them, I just haven't really gotten very far in them. Now, the stages in this game are of course based on the past games in the franchise. At least here it felt warranted as opposed to Forces, considering the fact that this one at least was an anniversary game, whereas Forces more or less just references those older games to say, hey look, it's Green Hill again. And as for those stages, let's start with Sonic's, considering his half of the game was the original part of this package. Each set of 3 stages represents different eras of Sonic. For the Genesis era, we have Green Hill Zone, Chemical Plant, and Sky Sanctuary. Then we have the Dreamcast era with Speed Highway, City Escape, and Seaside Hill, which is strange to me considering Seaside Hill is in Sonic Heroes, despite this being referred to as the Dreamcast era. And Heroes wasn't on the Dreamcast. It was the first game to be multi-platform. Though, I guess if the Dreamcast actually lasted long, it might have been a Dreamcast game. Who knows? Lastly, we have the then modern era, which includes Crisis City, Rooftop Run, and Planet Wisp. And while the games represented aren't really modern anymore, it was modern in 2011 when this game originally came out. That being said, I'm sure there were spin-offs between colors and generations. In fact, I think Sonic 4 Episode 1 might have come out before Generations, but I don't entirely remember. It's been about a decade since those games came out. Each era also has a boss representing that time for Sonic. With the Genesis era, we have the Death Egg robot. And at least this time you have rings instead of having to fight this thing without getting hit. For the record, that's the only reason I've never finished Sonic 2. Shit, I said the quiet part out loud again. For the Dreamcast era, there's Perfect Chaos from Sonic Adventure. And man, does this make me happy to fight it with the Sonic Adventure skin that was a bonus with the Day 1 edition of this game. Plus, Chaos is sporting a redesign with a bit of armor around it. Apparently this is what Perfect Chaos was originally supposed to look like, but the Dreamcast couldn't render it. Maybe it's time or development or whatever, but I like this redesign, if it does kind of contradict how he looked in the original game. For the modern era, we have the Egg Dragoon from Sonic Unleashed. Frankly, I wouldn't have thought of using this boss, but I guess at the time it would have been the best boss to represent the then modern era of Sonic. Frankly, I would have picked Solaris from Sonic 06, but I'm crazy and actually like that boss. That being said, it probably also would have helped had I played more of Sonic Unleashed than just the opening stages. I do own the game, I've been busy with other games. Before I get on to the final boss of Sonic's section, I do want to shift over to Shadow's half of this collection. His version of the white space is more an open zone similar to the islands and frontiers. And damn am I happy to have a full 3D Sonic game, as opposed to the Boost games that were 3D, but 3D as a roller coaster. I know, and I liked it there too. I'm just happy they brought it back for this remaster, even if it's just for Shadow's gameplay. And that's not to say I hate the Boost games, but to be fair, as someone who grew up in the 2000s with grand 3D platformers, I guess I just missed that era. Most Sonic games from Unleashed to Forces were in this Boost formula when half the game feels like you're running through a roller coaster, as opposed to actually having proper control of your character. Plus, half of them are forcing you into a 2D section. That doesn't feel like a 2D platformer, that feels closer to, say, Crash Bandicoot, which granted is considered a 3D platformer, but it doesn't feel like others. That's not to say all these games were bad, but I just enjoy a bit more freedom with my 3D platformers. Anyway, where was I? Oh right, Shadow's side of this game. So this was added to this remaster as an incentive to buy this version if you already had the original game. When this was first announced, I vaguely remember people assuming this would be a small thing similar to the Shadow DLC for Forces, where they might add a few new stages here or there, but all in all it's basically just Shadow running through Sonic stages. However, what we got is closer to, say, Bowser's Fury from Mario 3D World Remaster. For all intents and purposes, this might as well be a small Sonic game included in the package. And before I even get to my final thoughts, I recommend picking up this remaster just for the Shadow Generations bit alone. The stages here are Space Colony Arc, Rail Canyon, that one opening stage from Sonic Forces, which name I've conveniently forgotten because Forces is just that forgettable, Kingdom Valley, and for some reason Kronos Island from Frontiers. I've been a bit salty about this, but it feels weird that they have a stage from Frontiers when it doesn't really make sense for Shadow considering he wasn't in Frontiers. Unless he just so happened to be in the background and we never saw or even heard from him. That being said, I do genuinely love this stage. I also forgot to mention one of the stages. During the first act of each stage, Black Doom will appear and warp Shadow over to Radical Highway from SA2. Before we actually take him on in the final boss, he forces you to run through the stage completely in the final section. Frankly, I think it would have made more sense for him to send you to a stage from Shadow's solo game. But with how many times he sends you to Radical Highway, this might as well be a reference to Westopolis with how many times you are forced to play it. As for the bosses, we have the Bio Lizard, Neo Metal Sonic, Mephiles, and Devil Doom. And something I enjoy here is the fact that they all give context to their relationship with Shadow. Hell, Mephiles tries to kill Shadow to find a way to return to the timeline after Sonic 06 was effectively erased from canon. It is funny to me that retrospectively, Sonic 06 is both canon and non-canon because the events kind of just cancel themselves out. Though it is a bit odd that Shadow doesn't have any rival fights, whereas Sonic does. Sonic gets to fight Metal Sonic, Shadow, and Silver for Chaos Emeralds to unlock his final boss. Shadow, on the other hand, doesn't really fight anyone outside of a boss fight. And in fact, instead of fighting Sonic yourself, it plays a cutscene of the fight from Sonic's playthrough. I'm not too upset that they went this route, considering Sonic does canonically win that fight, though it is a little weird that they even have it as a cutscene. Granted, at least this way it doesn't run into the same problem that Eggman fighting Tails in Sonic Adventure 2 has, where you can win as Eggman only for him to immediately be on the floor. One of the few downsides of Shadow's campaign is the fact that to unlock the boss fights, you are required to complete the challenges to get the keys to the boss gates. While you technically don't have to do every challenge, the only challenges that aren't required are extra challenges you get after finishing the game. Challenges that are intentionally harder and are only there to test your skill. Otherwise, every other challenge in this game is required to unlock a boss gate. To be fair, Sonic's side also has you do challenges to unlock the main boss fights, but you aren't required to do every challenge for a stage. Especially considering there are 5 challenges per Sonic per stage. Essentially meaning that you could end up doing 10 challenges per a stage just to unlock a key. That feels a bit dickish. That being said, if I had to guess, Shadow has you do all of his challenges as sort of padding. It is annoying, but I guess if they didn't do this, the game would be too short. It's still kind of dickish. Shadow also doesn't get a traditional super mode in this game. It doesn't bother me as much, though it is a little weird. Granted, Sonic is the one with all of the Chaos Emeralds.
No, he has a fake emerald. I'll have you swap it for the real thing after I'm finished with my mission.
Okay, most of the Chaos Emeralds. It's a weird retcon, but it doesn't really change much story-wise. Frankly, it's mostly just here to explain how Shadow's able to use his Chaos Control after the rival fight. Anyway, instead of a normal super form, Shadow gets the Doomwing ability. For all intents and purposes, this is Shadow's super form in this game, and it's fine for the most part. It took some getting used to when I first played the game, but it's basically a glide move that gives him invincibility. And much like any super form in a Sonic game, it also uses up rings that you have. With this ability, we can fly over and finally confront Black Doom and his giant eye moon thing. You know, I don't think we ever get an explanation as to what this Eye of Sauron thing is, but it does follow you around the hub, so that's neat, I guess. Anyway, we're up here now, so once going through Radical Highway one final time, we get to beat the shit out of Black Doom before he gets a new form, Neo Devil Doom. Man, that name just screams edgy 2000s to me, but neither of the fights are bad. Unlike most Sonic fights, you actually have to use all of the skills you have properly gained throughout the game. It can be a bit annoying, as you do need to know how to properly use the Doom Morph ability, but if you take the time to practice and fully understand the ability before this fight, the first phase is actually pretty badass. Once Devil Doom shifts into a second phase, you use the Doomwing ability to follow him, and while this does devolve into waiting for him to be open for a homing attack, it at least is visually more exciting than the Time Eater fight that I'll talk about in a minute. Hell, you actually have to dodge the obstacles that Neo Devil Doom sends your way. Once you get that health bar down enough, Shadow punches a hole through Devil Doom, causing him to explode and fade from existence. I guess Shadow's section of white space is tied to Black Doom because when he dies, the area starts to fade away as well. Before it does, Shadow has Rouge swap out the fake emerald as he says goodbye to Maria and Gerald Robotnik. I haven't really mentioned them before now because I'm mostly skimming the story, but due to timey-wimey bullshit that's happening in the game, they are a part of Shadow's story, and it does make his story a bit more interesting than Sonic's, mostly considering he actually has a story this time. Also, Big is here. There's no reason why, and if I had to guess, he probably lost Froggy again, but there's not a quest to help him, he's just kind of here. You can talk to him. As for Marie and Gerald, it is nice to actually have a story that means a damn for Shadow, as opposed to his solo game that was a convoluted mess, and Sonic's story in Generations, which might as well not exist. Throughout the story, Shadow even struggles with warning them about the attack on the space colony Ark. We even get to see him have a genuine smile, which, frankly, hit me all warm and fuzzy inside. And after you go after all the balloons that are around the hub carrying these large canisters, they hold pages of Gerald's journal from Sonic Adventure 2, though most of the pages have been redacted and are removed.
This was even included as a pack-in if you have the Day 1 edition or pre-ordered the game.
I love that they did this, and it fills in some of the blanks from Shadow's backstory, and reveals events that we didn't even know, such as Gerald having 2 sons, and the fact that Maria had a younger sister. Maybe we can see that in a future game. Granted, the most they'll probably do is reference it in the comics as opposed to actually having it in one of the games, but it's still nice to think about. With that being said, there's only one thing really left to do, and that's to fight the worst boss in the game. I do like the idea of fighting a boss that seems to be in a time stream and controlling time around it, but the time meter boils down to the same ramming into the weak point that 90% of Sonic boss fights have. The boss we had to deal with before this, the Egg Dragoon, at least had you race through multiple sections and even had you switch from running after the boss to falling down a large bin or something. It, again, would have made a bit more sense had I played Sonic Unleashed. I don't remember where the Egg Dragoon is supposed to take place. It would be cool if, while you chase the time meter, you have to do small platforming sections in the past to reach weak points instead of what we have. Not to mention all of your friends giving you the most annoying moral support they can give. Yes, I know it looks like a homing shot. It's almost like that's the only attack this fucking boss has. Sonic's friends will not shut up during this fight, and while it's not a particularly hard fight, the longer you take, the more you have to hear your friends every time the time meter uses a homing shot. I'd also skip over this, but the time meter is being controlled by both Eggman. Don't know why they made Robotnik the Eggman of the past, but I do know it's something that was only in the Western continuity. This is kind of just them fusing the Western and Japanese continuities, which is something that they kind of already did in Sonic Adventure. It's a weird scene. It also doesn't help that they refer to Eggman as your Eggman in an earlier scene in this remaster, which wouldn't really make sense considering classic Sonic and Tails still refer to Robotnik as Robotnik in the very next scene. It's just dumb. Once we homing attack through the time meter enough times, we fix the timeline problems that both Eggman have done and return to Sonic's birthday party. Shadow's here as well, despite being on the Space Colony arc. I don't know, I guess teleporting them back to his party teleports everyone, which I guess that also means Orbot, Cubot, and Big might be here, but we don't see them, so it doesn't matter. And, funnily enough, unlike Sonic 06, this game doesn't erase the events from the timeline. So, everyone here at least remembers what happens to them in future games.
Oh, you're that Sonic from another dimension, aren't you?
Everyone except for the writers, apparently. Jeez, I hate forces. Anyway, the game ends with Sonic telling his past self to enjoy his future, and that it'll be a good one. And it's a nice scene for all intents and purposes.
Hey Sonic! Enjoy your future! It's gonna be great!
Okay, I want to quickly bring this up because I did post that joke earlier and people had been commenting on it. If this is classic Sonic from the Genesis era, let's say after Sonic 3 or so, then let's boil down how many Sonic games came out between 3 and Knuckles and Generations that were actually good. I'm mostly going to be mentioning mainline games and, more importantly, games that I have personally played myself, even if it's a small amount. So if a game's on this list that I hadn't played or I don't mention, it's most likely because, one, I hadn't played, or I don't own. And I will get to them eventually.
I always race to win, keep running to the end. I gotta move and stay one step ahead. Sit back and watch me go the only way I know, cause nothing's gonna slow me down. I'm running really fast, sit down and watch me pass. Doing my best to stay ahead of you. Don't let you catch me, you're gonna pass me. Because I think I know what you're gonna do. Not gonna look back cause I don't wanna see. Not gonna worry who is gaining on me. Race to win, race to win, race to win. The race is getting rough, but I just won't give up. The competition's getting really tough. The race is getting rough, but I just won't give up. The competition's getting really tough. Not gonna happen, cause I'm not stopping. No way, no how, I know the game's inside. I always race to win, keep running to the end. I gotta move and stay one step ahead. Stay back and watch me go the only way I know. Because you know I always race, always race, always race to win.
Jesus, this series has its ups and downs. As for my opinions on these games, I'll gladly elaborate on them on a later date, though I do have reviews of some of the 3D games already, which you can find in the card above. I do enjoy this series, and I'm more than happy to return to it for a video. But I've had a few other reviews planned for a while that I really need to get to. With that being said, it's 2025, and I definitely have a few games I plan on looking at this year. So until then, I'll see you guys.